How do I use borders, shading, and shapes as layout elements? A lot tutorial. Here's the design Arnold Gates created for the revamp of the Strong Ties newsletter. In this tutorial, we're going to focus on how to use borders and shading, an especially good example of which we can see here on the left side of the document, in order to organize information and to attract your reader's attention. One way to approach design is to create a consistent grid on each page and then fill that grid with design objects, including text and graphics. A grid divides pages into a series of rectangular areas that can organize content. Vertical grid lines divide the page into columns, and horizontal grid lines, also known as flow lines, divide the page into rows. Each rectangle in the grid is called a grid field. When considering how to place design objects in the grid, we need to remember that Western readers tend to scan documents in a Z pattern, moving from left to right and from top to bottom. If we use the grid to break the page into smaller elements, like those that might characterize a newsletter with a nameplate, a sidebar, and a main text area, we should provide cues for readers about how to approach the chunked information. One way to do this is by enclosing information in boxes that are shaded or have borders. Returning to the revamped newsletter design, let's get started on teaching ourselves how to develop a similar layout. First, we'll add grid lines to a document to help us divide it into meaningful parts, like the ones we see here. Next, we'll create a colored box that will contain a headline and some text for the newsletter. Here we have a publisher document with all the raw components of the revamped design. Most design programs provide you with a way to create grid lines. These grid lines appear on the screen to help with layout, but they do not appear in your final document, whether you print it or save it to another format like PDF. In Publisher, you can set up a grid by going to the Arrange menu, selecting Layout Guides, and then moving to the Grid Guides tab. The revamped design has 3 columns, so I'm going to increment the column value until it's 3. Spacing down here represents the space in between the columns, which is also known as the gutter, and I'm going to accept the default value here. Now, since I'm not really sure how many rows will be useful in creating the design, I'm going to set this number at 6, which I think will provide me with a large enough number of small enough grid fields to help me get a pretty granular placement on any objects that I'd like to put in. I'm going to go ahead and accept the default spacing here at 0 and click OK. So as you can see now, Publisher has put my grid lines in my document. Now remember, these lines will not print. They're simply to help you lay out your document. Okay, I want to take this text, the headline Strong Ties and Amity, as well as the list of items that Strong Ties is doing in the Amity community, and move it into a sidebar here on the page. And what I'd like to do is surround that text and headline with a box to show that it's one unit and to be read as one unit. So I'm going to come over here to the toolbar and I'm going to click on the rectangle tool. And then I'm going to come into my document and I'm going to sort of approximate where in the grid I want to place my box. And I'm just going to click, hold, and drag and create a box. Now, this box is the design object and it has various properties. In most desktop publishing programs, the way you can alter these properties is simply by right-clicking to pull up a context menu. I'm going to come down here to Format Auto Shape, and I'm presented with a bunch of properties about this box that I can change. Right now you'll notice that this box has no color or no fill, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to select a color or a fill for that box. I'm going to choose this particular color because it looks like the one that Arnold had put in the revamped document. And there's what the box will look like. I also have the option to alter the border around the box, and that's where this line part of the dialog box comes in. I think what I'm going to do is, at first, I'm not going to put any line around the box. Okay, so now I'm going to click OK, and if I come back out to my document, there's my yellow box. All right, now I'm ready to place my text in the box. I'm going to come over here to my list of items. I'm going to click, hold, and drag the items into the box. Now you'll notice that I did move the items, but they seem to be not there. One of the things that you need to remember with all these design programs is that they work with a principle called layers. And what happens is design objects can be stacked above and below each other. And what's happened here is that my text is behind my box. So what I need to do is either bring the text box forward or send the rectangle, the auto shape, back. And it's usually easier to send the shape back because the shape is what's covering up the text box. So what I'm going to do is select the rectangle, and then I'm going to come down to Order, Send Backward, and then as you can see, the shape goes back and the text shows up in front. Okay, now what I want to do is adjust the position of the text box inside of the rectangle. To do that, I'm going to zoom in to the document a little bit closer here so we can get a better look. Now you can see that here's the border of the text box and here's the border of the rectangle. What I would like to do is just make the space between the bullets and the side of the rectangle seem equal to where this text is breaking over here on the right. So I'm going to click on the text box, and as you can see, I've selected it. And now I'm going to go down to the keyboard, and I'm going to use the arrow keys to nudge or move the text over just a bit. And so now you can see that it looks like on either side of this text box there's about equal space. Okay, finally now, what I'm ready to do is place my headline. So I'm going to come over here and grab Strong Ties and Amity and bring this up. And I think what I would like to do is try to center it over the text. So what that means is I'm going to stretch out the text box. Then I'm going to come up to the place here where I can determine where that text is going to appear, how it's going to appear inside of the text box. And I'm going to click Centered. So as you can see, I've placed the text box, it's snapped to those grid lines, and I know it's centered over this. What I think also I'm going to do is come up here to the rectangle, and I'm going to drag the top of this down just a bit so that it's closer to my headline. And I'm going to drag the bottom of this up a bit so that it's closer to my final point there. Now I'm going to click off of this. Now, as you know, I've got three pieces in here. I've got a headline, I've got my text of the bullet points, and I've got the rectangle. To keep from pulling this apart, I can do something called grouping. To group objects together, I can select all the objects by clicking and holding and dragging around them. And once I do that, you see down here, there's this group object symbol. To group those objects together now, I can simply click on that, and all of those become one object. So that means when I move this object, all the pieces move together, and I don't have to worry about dragging the text on or off of the rectangle.